Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, earlier today, I asked the Minister of Finance if he had calculated the impact of a credit rating downgrade. It is troubling to learn that his department hasn't even done this most basic of financial risk management. Today, my single budget researcher calculated that a 1% increase to Alberta's borrowing costs starting in 2017 will result in over $700 million in additional debt servicing costs just 2 years later. To the Minister of Finance, it seems incredible to me that your department hasn't done these calculations. If you haven't done them, will you? And if you have, will you table the results?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. No one wants to see a credit rating downgrade, of course, but I can tell you our plan is to build the economy so that won't happen. That kind of view is negative and not optimistic. We have a different view, and we're going to follow through with it.
Supplemental. Mr. Speaker, how do they know it's not a risk if they haven't done the work? So let's try another finance question, Mr. Speaker. Now, last week, I tabled the Alberta Party's alternative budget, which balances in 3 years while still investing in infrastructure and protecting frontline services. Now, as of today, no other opposition party has tabled theirs. As we prepared this document, we discovered there's a big gap in the ND's plan, which makes it nearly impossible to balance without significant new revenues or spending cuts. To the Premier, where does the money come from?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me begin. I do appreciate that coming up with a shadow budget is awfully a lot of work. And one certainly does need to get up pretty early in the morning to find the time to put together a shadow budget. But that being said, all other things being equal, it's very important to understand this government is in the position of having the lowest debt per GDP of any province in the country now and also 5 years from now. And the best way to make sure we stay that way is to pass our legislation that this minister will be introducing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier doesn't seem to know where the budget gap comes from, but I do. It comes from overly optimistic revenue forecasts, and there is a huge risk to our province if they're wrong. Now, I've thought about it, and I think I know where the government plans to get the money. They have repeatedly said they plan to increase royalties, and again to the Premier. You seem to assume higher royalties will fill this budget gap. If so, if you already know the outcomes of the royalty panel, what's the point of the panel in the first place?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I believe I've already answered this question earlier, let me be very clear. The panel will make the recommendations to the government that they make. But what we have been very clear on is that any increase, any incremental increase that arises as a result of any changes will go into the Heritage Trust Fund and is not part of our budgeting process. That's one of the things we committed to in the election campaign, and that is one of the things that we will stick to. We also have introduced a budget with the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio of the rest of the country now and 5 years from now. And this member over there should know that and should be proud that we are building Alberta at the same time.